I wasn't even given the dignity of a cardboard box, just a thin, gray security envelope and a hollow smirk from the HR director. But that was the bitter end. Let's wind the clock back 3 weeks to the moment the foundation began to crack. We were all assembled in the glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor, overlooking the rain-slicked streets of the financial district. Steam rose from ceramic. Coffee cups, laptops hummed, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and anxiety. Then the heavy mahogany door swung open, and Marcus Thorne stepped in. He wore a charcoal gray suit that cost more than my first car, custom-made Oxfords that didn't make a sound on the carpet, and possessed a grip that stayed tight just a fraction of a second too long. Marcus was introduced as our new Chief Revenue Officer, a title that sounded more like a threat than a promotion. The CEO stood up, beaming as if he'd just discovered fire, announcing that Marcus was here to recalibrate our trajectory and inject high-velocity energy into our aging structure. High velocity was an understatement. Marcus gleamed like a weapon freshly pulled from a holster. "I appreciate the welcome," Marcus said. His smile bright but surgically cold, never quite reaching his eyes. "This firm has a storied history, but if I'm being transparent, history can often become a set of chains. I don't believe in tradition, I believe in momentum, radical streamlining, and an uncompromising focus on peak output." Most people in the room laughed, that nervous, submissive corporate laugh. I remained silent. "My name is Elena Vance. I had spent the last 11 years building the bridges that kept this company afloat. I was the one who handled the accounts no one else could touch, the enterprise partners who valued loyalty and nuance over buzzwords and flash. I wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but my portfolio was the heaviest. I'd seen predators like Marcus before. They arrived cloaked in the language of disruption, promising evolution while preparing to scavenge the remains of the teams they dismantled. Still, I played the part. I nodded, I smiled, and I kept my notes concise. It was the safest path, but the frost arrived early. Within his first 7 days, Marcus had retired 2 veteran department heads, shifted departmental borders without a single memo, and began peppering his speeches with phrases like legacy friction and value-add optimization, while staring directly at me across the mahogany table. The first real jab came in a late-night email. "Elena, moving forward, please ensure all your strategic briefs are vetted by the junior strategy desk before they reach the client. We need a unified voice." The client he was referring to was Arthur Sterling, the founder of Sterling Global, our largest revenue source and a man I had worked with through 3 market crashes and a merger. Something felt dangerously off, so I started digging. Beneath the polished exterior of Marcus Thorne's LinkedIn profile, I found a trail of quiet destruction. A decade ago, his name was quietly linked to a massive restructuring at a Silicon Valley firm that resulted in a 40% loss of their top-tier accounts within 6 months. There were no lawsuits, just a mountain of non-disclosure agreements and a trail of broken professional lives. I looked at his sleek, professional headshot on our internal portal, then looked out at the city I had served for a decade. I felt a sensation I hadn't known this job could produce, a cold, sharp fear, but also a hardening of my resolve. Marcus thought. I was just a line item on a spreadsheet, a piece of legacy friction, to be smoothed over. He had no idea what I had actually built, or the depth of the roots I had planted in the soil of this industry. Not yet. He saw a passenger, I was the architect. For a few days, I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid. Marcus had only been in the office for 2 weeks, perhaps I was simply resisting the inevitable discomfort of a new leadership style. Just because he spoke in slogans and walked like he owned the oxygen in the room didn't mean he was specifically targeting me. However, the feeling of the ground shifting beneath my feet became impossible to ignore on a Tuesday morning. I arrived at my desk at 7:45 a.m. only to find a 24-year-old junior associate named Chloe already sitting in my ergonomic chair. She had her headset on and my proprietary client database open on her second monitor. She looked up and chirped with a brightness that felt like a paper cut. "Oh, hey Elena. Marcus suggested I set up here for the week. He wants the growth team and the retention team in one pod to maximize synergy." That was my workspace, my personal files, and my territory. I swallowed the surge of bile in my throat and forced a neutral expression. "No problem, Chloe. I'll just grab a flex desk in the back." But it was a problem, a massive, systemic problem. That afternoon, I went for a walk to clear my head and bumped into Julian, a former director who had been pushed out during the great recalibration Marcus had led at his previous firm. We grabbed a quick espresso. And when I mentioned Marcus's name, Julian's hand actually trembled as he lowered his cup. "Elena, listen to me very carefully. Marcus Thorne doesn't manage companies, he harvests them. He cuts the muscle thinking it's fat, takes the credit for the initial spike in profit, and leaves before the skeleton collapses. If you're in his crosshairs, you're already a ghost. He doesn't value relationships, he values structures that he can control entirely. I tried to defend my position, mentioning my 11 years of flawless client retention and the $12 million sterling account. Julian just shook his head. He doesn't see your value, Elena. He sees your autonomy as a threat. To Marcus, anything that existed before he arrived is a defect. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed every interaction, every slide Marcus had presented, and the way he had stopped using my name in meetings, referring to me only as the account lead. I realized then that my tenure wasn't a shield, it was a target. The confirmation arrived on Thursday at exactly 8:12 a.m. A notification pinged on my private phone. It was an email from Arthur Sterling, and the subject line sent a chill through my bones, checking in. The email was brief but telling. Elena, I noticed a strange shift in our project flow this week. I haven't heard from you since the Monday briefing, but I've received 3 emails from a girl named Chloe regarding our Q4 expansion. Is there a reorganization I should be aware of? I'd prefer to keep our communications consistent. My heart hammered against my ribs. Arthur wasn't just a client, he was the cornerstone of the firm. I had landed that account when it was worth peanuts, and I had grown it into a titan. We had a shorthand, a level of trust that took years to cultivate. Now, he was being managed by someone who didn't know the history of his company or the temperament of his board. I stared at the blinking cursor for 5 minutes before typing a response. Arthur, I am still very much here. There is some internal restructuring, but I am still your primary lead. I will call you shortly to discuss. I hit send, but I knew the damage was already being initiated. This wasn't just a miscommunication, it was the first move in a silent war. Someone was pulling the strings behind the scenes, effectively erasing my presence while I was still sitting in the office. I had to face the terrifying reality. Was I already fired in Marcus's mind? By the start of Marcus's 3rd week, the erasure moved from subtle to surgical. I was no longer being invited to the Monday morning leadership syncs. There was no memo, no formal removal, the calendar invites simply vanished from my Outlook. When I approached the office manager, Sarah, to ask if the meetings had been moved, she wouldn't even meet my eyes. She just stared at her keyboard and mumbled, Marcus wanted to keep the group lean and agile for this quarter, Elena. I'm just following the list he gave me. I nodded as if that were a perfectly logical explanation and walked back to my temporary flex desk. I could feel the eyes of the younger associates on me, the pity, the curiosity, the cold calculation of who was next on the list. It was exile by eraser. Little by little, my name was being stripped from the company's vital organs. My input on strategy calls was no longer requested, my name was missing from the CC line on high-level emails, my voice, once the authority on client psychology, was being treated as background noise. I felt like a ghost haunting my own office. Even the client threads became a battleground of silence. I would only find out about major project milestones after they had already been botched or delayed. Marcus had found a way to kill my career without ever having to fire me, he was just letting me starve for information until I became irrelevant. But I wasn't going to crawl into a corner and disappear. I did what I had always done, I observed, I documented, and I prepared. The real fracture happened on a Tuesday. Arthur Sterling's team was preparing for a massive software integration, a project I had spent 9 months architecting. It involved complex compliance layers and security protocols that were delicate and non-negotiable. Arthur was a man of precision, one slip-up would destroy a decade of trust. Late that afternoon, I received a frantic text from my contact at Sterling Global, Elena, did Chloe get your sign-off on the new compliance headers? They look wrong. We're worried. My stomach turned. I hadn't seen any headers. I logged into the shared server and found a new version of the integration plan. It had been stripped of its security redundancies, the very things Arthur had insisted on, and replaced with high-speed shortcuts. The author of the document was Chloe, but I could see Marcus's fingerprints all over the logic. I checked the internal Slack channel. Chloe had posted, sent the optimized plan to Sterling Global. Marcus, thanks for the guidance on cutting the legacy bloat. We're moving so much faster now. Marcus had replied with a fire emoji. There was no mention of me. No review request. No courtesy. I called Arthur immediately. He picked up on the first ring, his voice uncharacteristically cold. Elena, we are currently in a boardroom with our legal team. This new proposal is a violation of our primary agreement. If this is the new direction of your firm, we cannot continue this partnership. This rollout is being monitored by the federal regulators. We cannot afford high-speed mistakes. I apologized, promised to fix it manually, and spent the next 4 hours reverting the document. When the call ended, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just a mistake, it was an assassination attempt on my professional reputation. Marcus wasn't just trying to replace me, he was willing to burn the company's biggest account just to prove that I was legacy. Bloat. That evening, Marcus posted a general announcement on the Slack channel. Team, we need to ensure all client materials are future-ready. Sloppy work on major accounts reflects poorly on all of us. Let's stay focused on the new standards. He didn't use names, but the implication was clear. He was blaming me for the mess he and Chloe had created. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. I wasn't shocked, I had expected this. I had finally seen the full playbook. Marcus wouldn't fire me yet. He would let the miscommunication and the fabricated failures isolate me until the board had no choice but to let me go. It was death by 1,000 calendar exclusions. I packed my bag, looked at the flickering city lights, and realized that I was no longer fighting for my job. I was fighting for my survival. The following Monday, a mandatory all-hands meeting was called under the banner, the Horizon Initiative. It was a classic corporate branding move, a positive title for a meeting meant to instill fear. The entire office was packed into the main atrium. Marcus stood at the front, his sleeves rolled up to mid-forearm, a whiteboard marker in his hand. Like a conductor's baton. He looked like he had just closed the deal of the century. He began with a slide titled, Efficiency Through Evolution. Let's be honest with ourselves, Marcus began, pacing the floor with predatory grace. Every organization reaches a plateau. Not because the market fails, but because the people inside the machine start coasting. They rely on what worked 10 years ago instead of what works today. He clicked to the next slide. It featured 2 stark columns, drivers and passengers. He scanned the room, his gaze lingering on the veterans, eventually settling on me for a second too long. We are entering an era of drivers. We need people who push the needle, not people who just sit in the seat, hoping the momentum of the past will carry them into the future. Passengers are a luxury we can no longer afford. The silence in the room was suffocating. I could see my younger colleagues shifting uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. They knew who Marcus was talking about. I felt the heat of 50 silent judgments, but I didn't lower my gaze. I had led this company through 2 recessions. I was the one who had built the engine he was currently trying to redline. Marcus spent the next hour vomiting startup jargon, velocity, frictionless scaling, cost hygiene, all while outlining a plan that essentially erased the human element of our business. I stopped listening to the words and started watching the mechanics of his deception. He was selling a fantasy of infinite growth built on the bones of the people who actually did the work. When the meeting ended, there was a smattering of polite, forced applause. I packed my notebook in silence, my hand steady despite the fury vibrating in my chest. Back at my desk, or rather, the small corner of a shared table I now occupied, an email was waiting for me. Subject, Voluntary Transition Opportunity. It was from the HR Shared Services portal. Hi Elena, in an effort to align our human capital with the current fiscal projections, the leadership team is offering a select group of employees the option for a non-mandatory, unpaid sabbatical. This is a voluntary pause intended for those whose roles are undergoing strategic evaluation. Duration, 30 to 60 days. Benefits remain active. Please confirm your interest by end of day. I stared at the screen, stunned by the sheer cowardice of the move. They weren't firing me because they didn't want to pay the severance or trigger the key employee clause in the Sterling contract. They were trying to freeze me out, dignified on paper, but a death sentence in practice. It was a coward's layoff. I read the phrase, highly encouraged, and felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. I thought about the weekends I'd spent in this office, the vacations I'd canceled to save failing integrations, the anniversaries I'd missed to ensure Arthur Sterling's board was happy. And this was the reward, a template email offering me the chance to disappear quietly. My humiliation didn't lead to tears, it led to a very specific kind of fire. A quiet, focused rage that sharpens the mind and narrows the field of vision. I didn't reply to the email. I didn't go to HR. I simply closed my laptop, walked to the restroom, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. Marcus Thorne thought he was dealing with a passenger. He didn't realize that I didn't just drive the machine, I knew every bolt, every wire, and every failsafe that kept it from exploding. If he wanted to sunset my career, I would make sure he saw the most spectacular sunset of his life. The end arrived on a Monday. It's always a Monday. Mondays are for the dirty work, the day when HR walks a little softer and the coffee tastes like copper. I was at my station by 7:30 a.m., acting as if the world wasn't ending. The voluntary sabbatical email had sat in my inbox all weekend like a ticking bomb. I hadn't answered it, and I didn't need to. They weren't waiting for my permission anymore. At 8:05 a.m., a calendar invite flashed on my screen, operational review, conference room B. No agenda, just two names, Marcus Thorne and me. I grabbed a pen and a notebook I didn't intend to use and walked toward the room. Marcus was already there, standing by the window. He didn't have his blazer on, his shirt was crisp, his posture arrogant. He didn't look like a man about to fire someone, he looked like a man about to clear some clutter from his desk. "Morning, Elena," he said, not looking at me. He pointed to the chair across from him. On the table sat a single, face-down sheet of paper. He tapped it once. "I'll be direct. We are moving in a new direction. Realigning our priorities to focus on high-impact scalability. You've been instrumental in the past," he added, the word past hanging in the air like a threat. "But as the firm evolves, certain roles have to sunset to make room for new growth." Sunset. That corporate euphemism for disappear. Marcus flipped the paper over. My name was at the top in bold, black ink. It was a termination notice, effective immediately. Final pay in 72 hours. Badge deactivated by noon. This wasn't an easy call, Marcus lied, his voice as flat as a dial tone. "But it's necessary for the health of the organization. Chloe will be assuming the lead on the Sterling account. She's already building a great rapport with them." I opened my mouth to speak, but the words were stuck. There was no one else in the room, no HR witness, no legal counsel. Just Marcus and his smirk. "I wouldn't worry too much, Elena," Marcus said, his smile finally tilting up at the corners. "Your accounts won't even notice you're gone. We've already transitioned the data." That was the line that broke the final thread of my professional decorum. In one sentence, he had dismissed 11 years of loyalty, trust, and painstaking work. He had reduced my entire career to a data transfer. I felt something shatter inside, not my spirit, but my faith in the right way of doing things. I realized that merit was a lie in Marcus Thorne's world. Power was the only currency. "I see," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Marcus nodded, looking relieved that I wasn't going to make a scene. He gestured toward the door. "Security. We'll escort you once you've cleared your personal items. You have 20 minutes. I stood up, took the memo, and slid it into my notebook. I didn't thank him. I didn't argue. There is no point in yelling at a hurricane. I walked back to my desk through a gauntlet of averted gazes. Chloe was typing with performative intensity. Sarah from HR was suddenly very interested in a filing cabinet. One person, a junior analyst named Ben, gave me a tiny, sad nod. No one else said a word. The fear of being the next one, sunset, was more powerful than a decade of friendship. I packed my few belongings, a photo of my dog, a fountain pen Arthur Sterling had given me after our first big win, and a notebook full of technical specs. As I walked toward the elevator, I looked back at the glass conference room. Marcus was already inside, laughing with the CEO. He looked weightless, as if the act of destroying a career had no more impact on him than swatting a fly. I felt erased, but for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel heavy. I felt cold. I felt clean. I didn't cry when I handed over my badge. I didn't cry when the security guard followed me to the lobby. I walked out into the biting wind of a sunny Monday, took a deep breath of the city air, and realized that while they had taken my badge, my desk, and my title, they had forgotten the one thing that actually mattered. They had left me with the pulse. By 9:45 a.m., I was sitting in my living room. I didn't even take off my coat. I tossed my bag onto the sofa, opened my personal laptop, and waited for the screen to glow. I navigated through 3 layers of encrypted folders until I reached a file simply labeled Vanguard_0v.3. I called it the Pulse. It was a system I had built years ago as a side project, a shadow monitoring tool designed to track client health and communication frequency. No one at the firm even remembered it existed. I had built it to protect my clients, to ensure that if I ever missed an escalation, the system would flag it. It was never intended for sabotage. But today, the definition of protection had changed. The Pulse dashboard flickered to life. It was a web of relationship chains, trust indicators, and account IDs. It monitored over 30 enterprise-level clients. It tracked every delay in response, every change in the point of contact, metadata, and every unresolved ticket. At its heart was the Trust Index, an algorithm I'd written that measured the stability of a client relationship. The moment Marcus deactivated my internal credentials, the Pulse felt the tremor. It flagged my separation without transition protocol. The system was designed to be autonomous. It didn't need me to click send. It followed the logic I had programmed into it years ago. If a primary relationship lead is removed without a formal transition, period, minimum 14 days, the client must be notified of a service continuity risk. At 10:07 a.m., the first red bar slid across the monitor. Sterling Global, primary contact change detected. Status, critical. The Pulse did exactly what it was built to do. It generated a neutral, automated alert and sent it to Arthur Sterling's executive team. The message was clinical: service continuity alert, a change in your designated relationship architect has been detected without a standard transition brief. To ensure the integrity of your current integrations, please verify your service preferences with your account representative. That was all it took. Because with men like Arthur Sterling, the relationship wasn't about the company's brand, it was about me. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, watching the screen. I wasn't hacking, I wasn't leaking secrets. I was simply letting the truth speak for itself through a system they were too arrogant to remember. It felt like a slow-moving fire beneath the floorboards. Marcus thought he could erase me with a memo, but he didn't understand that I had woven myself into the very fabric of the client's operations. The Pulse would now do what I couldn't. It would echo the silence Marcus had created. This wasn't revenge in the cinematic sense. I wasn't going to call the board or scream about unfairness. I was going to let Marcus Thorne's own high-velocity culture be his undoing. I closed the laptop and stood by the window. The city outside was oblivious. But inside the servers of Northbridge Group, a single thread had been pulled. One alert would become 5. 5 would become 20. I wouldn't have to lift a finger. I just had to wait for the system to breathe. Day 1 of my sunset was uncomfortably quiet. I stayed in my pajamas, staring at my phone, waiting for a sign that the world hadn't simply forgotten I existed. No calls, no texts from former colleagues, no LinkedIn notifications. It was as if I had never spent a single hour in that building. I refreshed my personal email every 20 minutes, even though I knew no one would reach out. By noon, however, the Pulse logs showed that 12 automated alerts had been dispatched. 12 service continuity risks had landed in the inboxes of the 12 most powerful people in the industry. I expected the silence to continue, but I had underestimated the speed of Arthur Sterling. On day 2, I went for a long walk in the park, trying to convince myself that I was okay with being a ghost. When I returned, my phone was vibrating on the kitchen counter. I picked it up and saw a forwarded email from a private contact. The subject line was, Urgent, Service Integrity Inquiry. It was a chain that had started with Arthur Sterling and had already looped in 4 other major CEOs. I opened the laptop and saw the full scope of the fire. Arthur hadn't just called the firm, he had sent a group email to the CEO, Marcus Thorne, and the entire board of directors. To whom it may concern, Arthur had written, his tone like a razor. Our systems received an automated service continuity risk alert this morning regarding the removal of Elena Vance. We have received no formal communication regarding this transition. Given the delicate nature of our current Q4 integration, we are officially pausing all project phases until we receive a full explanation. CC'd here are several colleagues who have expressed similar concerns regarding their own account stability this week. My heart leaped. Arthur had turned my Pulse alert into a signal fire. He had looped in the heads of Vitramed, CoreData, and Silvermark AI, accounts that represented nearly 60% of the firm's annual revenue. He wasn't just asking a question, he was staging a coup. He was telling the board that they didn't trust the company, they trusted me. The subtext was deafening: if she's gone, we're gone. This was the high-impact performance Marcus had been screaming about, but not in the way he had intended. I didn't reply to the thread. I didn't need to. I just watched the logs. By 3 p.m., my LinkedIn profile views skyrocketed. Recruiters from our biggest competitors were suddenly very interested in my new opportunities. But I wasn't looking for a new job yet. I was watching the Northbridge Group burn from the inside out. I received a text from Ben, the junior analyst who had nodded to me on my last day. Elena, the 42nd floor is a war zone. Marcus is in a closed-door meeting with the board. I heard him yelling about glitches in the system. They aren't buying it. Everyone is panicking. I smiled, a small, cold, satisfied smile. Marcus was trying to blame a glitch for his own lack of transparency. He was realizing that he couldn't just sunset a human being when that human being was the only thing holding the contracts together. The Pulse had spoken, and now the heavyweights of the industry were amplifying the message. I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the sun set over the city. Marcus Thorne thought he was the driver and I was the passenger. He was about to find out that when you kick the driver out of a moving car, the car doesn't just keep going. It crashes. By Wednesday morning, the tremors had become a full-scale earthquake. The Northbridge Group was in full damage control mode. I didn't need an office badge to know exactly what was happening. The industry news was already beginning to leak the story. I sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through the Pulse logs. 19 alerts now. 19 enterprise clients had officially flagged relationship instability. The undertow was pulling the firm's Reputation out to sea, and Marcus Thorne was desperately trying to swim against it. At 10:30 a.m., Ben sent me another update. Marcus is blaming the operations team now. He's telling the board that IT failed to send out the transition memos. He's throwing Sarah and the tech leads under the bus to save his own skin. But Arthur Sterling isn't letting up. He's demanding a face-to-face meeting with you, Elena. The board is asking Marcus where you are, and he's forced to tell them you're no longer with the firm. It's a bloodbath. I felt a twinge of guilt for Sarah and the others, but it was eclipsed by the sheer audacity of Marcus's lies. He was willing to destroy everyone's career just to maintain the illusion of his high-velocity success. But then, the message arrived, the one that changed everything. It was an email from Arthur Sterling directly to my personal account. Elena, I know what's happening. I've seen men like Marcus Thorne before. They are parasites. I've spoken with the board. They are terrified. They want to offer you your job back, but I told them not to bother. If they were stupid enough to let Marcus run the show, they don't deserve you. Let's talk about a new direction. I stared at the screen, my breath catching. Arthur wasn't just defending me, he was offering me an exit. But before I could even process that, another forwarded email hit my inbox. It was an internal memo Marcus had sent to the staff at 2 p.m. Team, we are experiencing some minor communication misfires with a few legacy accounts. We are treating this as a technical hurdle. Please remain focused on your growth targets. Do not engage in outside speculation. Minor communication misfires. I laughed out loud. He was watching $20 million in contracts evaporate and calling it a technical hurdle. He still thought he could spin his way out of the gravity of his own mistakes. But the final blow came at 4 p.m. An email from Dan Fielding, the CEO of Apex Tech Global, the firm's newest and most promising client. He hadn't been part of Arthur's original thread, but he had received a pulse alert. His email to Marcus and the board was short and lethal. We signed with Northbridge because of Elena Vance's reputation for integrity. If she has been removed, our contract is void under the key personnel clause. Consider this our formal 30-day notice. Do not contact us again. The key personnel clause. I had insisted on that clause in every contract I'd signed for the last 5 years. Marcus had probably never even read the contracts, he had just looked at the revenue numbers. He hadn't realized that I had legally bound the clients to me, not to the firm. I stood up and walked to my balcony, looking out at the skyline. Somewhere in that glass tower on the 42nd floor, Marcus Thorne was finally realizing that he hadn't just fired an employee. He had triggered a self-destruct sequence. The pulse wasn't a glitch, it was a mirror. It was showing the world exactly what Marcus Thorne was, a man who understood everything about velocity and nothing about value. I felt a strange sense of peace. The storm was here, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one trying to stop it. I was the one who had opened the sky. Friday morning was the end of the world for Marcus Thorne. I woke up to 42 missed calls, none of which I answered. Some were from HR, some from the board members I had known for years, and 3 were from Marcus's private office. I didn't need to hear his voice to know he was begging. The final recording of the week arrived via Ben at 11 a.m. It was an audio snippet from an emergency all-hands meeting. The sound was grainy, but Marcus's voice was unmistakable. He sounded frantic, stripped of his polished confidence. These disruptions they are an organized effort to destabilize our growth, he shouted. You could hear the desperation in his breath. We are investigating the technical anomalies that have led to these client exits. In the meantime, we are making further leadership adjustments. Then came the pivot, the ultimate act of a coward. The failure to manage the Sterling transition rests solely on the junior associates who were tasked with the handover. Chloe will be leaving the firm today. I felt a surge of cold anger. Chloe was inexperienced and arrogant, yes, but she was a kid following Marcus's direct orders. He was sacrificing a 24-year-old girl to try and buy himself one more week of credibility. But the room wasn't silent this time. You could hear a murmur of dissent, a collective realization that the driver was actually a saboteur. The recording ended with the sound of the CEO stepping to the podium, his voice grave. Marcus, please step down. We've seen enough. I closed the audio file and looked at my laptop. A formal offer had arrived from Arthur Sterling and 3 other major clients. They wanted to back me in starting my own boutique consultancy. They didn't want the Northbridge Group, they wanted the architect. They were offering to transfer their entire service budgets to my new venture the moment I was ready. I wasn't just getting my career back, I was taking the heart of the firm with me. By 1 p.m., the news hit the wire. Northbridge Group CRO Marcus Thorne resigns amidst massive client exodus. It was framed as a resignation, but the industry knew the truth. He was radioactive. He would never lead another major firm again. I thought about the security envelope I'd been handed on Monday. I thought about the smirk on Marcus's face when he told me my accounts wouldn't notice. I was gone. I opened the gray security envelope and took out the sunset memo. I didn't burn it. I didn't throw it away. I framed it. I put it on the wall of my new home office as a reminder. Marcus Thorne was right about one thing: organizations do reach a point where they need to evolve. But real evolution isn't about velocity or streamlining. It's about the pulse. It's about the invisible threads of trust that hold everything together. I looked out at the city, the rain finally stopping, the sun breaking through the clouds. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was the engine. I picked up my phone and dialed Arthur Sterling. Arthur? It's Elena. Let's talk about the new direction. I didn't feel vindictive. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt like myself. I had been erased, silenced, and discarded. But they had forgotten the most basic rule of the machine: you can't sunset the person who keeps the lights on. The pulse was steady. The foundation was mine. And the future? The future was finally under my control.